Hello,
Good evening.
and good evening, everyone. Welcome to this MACKMYRA Swedish single malt whiskey virtual tasting. I'm Richard McKeon, one of the brand ambassadors for MACKMYRA in the UK. Joining me, a blast from the past, and very happy to have him back to do another tasting with him, is Gareth Bell. Good evening, Gareth.
Hi, Richard. How are we doing today? All right?
Very well. Very happy to see you here as well. Appreciate we've done some in-person tastings recently, but good to have you back in your office where I first got to know you.
Looking forward to spending an hour or so talking about our whiskies and providing a little distraction for everybody. And let's focus on having a good time drinking some whiskies.
Sounds perfect. What a perfect setup, I'd say, Go. Great. So, everyone, thank you for joining. Just explain a little bit about how this will work and how things will proceed this evening. We'll go through each whiskey one by one. Gareth, in a moment, will give you the running order that we're going to try the whiskies in. As we go, we'll tell you a little bit about MACKMYRA, give you an intro at the beginning, a bit of background, and then with each whiskey that we have, we'll talk a little bit about what went into making that whiskey, some stories about the distilleries that we have or have been in, and talk about a bit of history of things as we go through, some anecdotes, whatever we might have. We'll also, if we can remember, we usually do, but offer you some tips and advice on how to nose and assess a whiskey that's in your glass. I appreciate that there will be people here this evening that are quite experienced, and then also usually there's quite a number of people that trying us for the first time and could do with some tips on how to assess and appreciate a single malt from Sweden as well. So Gareth, I'll say for running order, what order are we having the whiskies in?
Yeah, well, tonight we're having 4 from what we call our Core 4 range. In fact, a few of you guys may have purchased one of our packs, which has got the 4 core ranges. So we're going to do all of these and an extra special one as well. So the running order tonight is we got the Mack, and then we got the Brooks whiskey, Spence, which is all about Swedish oak, lovely stuff, Stjärnrök, which is a nice smoky and a bit of sherry in that one. And finally, we finish up with our old favorite, the Stjärnrök, which is the smoky recipe, which we always tend to leave to last because it's a bit of a tongue tingler, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. Very good. Well, thank you very much. And what about any offers that we're doing? Let's get that out of the way now in case anybody does fancy anything tonight.
Sure, yes, it's quite good. Our special tonight, which is the Stjärnrök. I can never really pronounce that properly. But if you do want to buy a Stjärnrök and try that, then you'll get a whopping 40% off any other bottle in our core range. So I think that's a pretty good deal. You basically buy one, you get one nearly half price from the core range. So have a look at that. And as you go through, try and work out what's your favorite. What are you liking so far? What parts of the whiskies are getting to your tongue? And we'll help you.
And I'll ask Carl in the background, our producer, as always, if he can keep flashing that code up until people have got the spelling down for it, just in case. I appreciate we've got, we used to just be the UK market and audience that we used to do these tastings for, but now appreciate we've got people joining us from all over Europe. Some people will have a better grasp on understanding how to spell Stjärnrök. And other people might not, so we'll get Carl to keep popping that up every now and then just so that you can make a note. Great. Right, so before we get into the first dram, I'll give everyone a not too brief but a brief background and history into MACKMYRA. We're Sweden's first single malt whiskey. There was a whiskey distillery sometime in the 60s or 70s that made grain whiskey, a combination of malt and grain, but we are Sweden's first single malt. Production began for us in December of 1999. The year before, our 8 founding members were all on holiday together on a skiing trip, something that they did once a year. They'd done a few years in a row at that point. But this year in 1998, everyone brought a bottle of whiskey along with them, completely unplanned. And then at some point during that holiday, somebody said, why is nobody making whiskey in Sweden? We should go out and do it. There's a big appetite for whiskey in Sweden. More whiskey clubs per capita in Sweden than any other country, at least as of last year, I believe. So obviously a big appetite, but no one making it. So they saw an opportunity to go and do so. So they did. The 3 founding principles that they decided upon and still continue to live by this day are Swedishness. So being as Swedish as possible, not just another Scottish style whiskey that happens to be in another country. They wanted everything to be as Swedish as it gets. So to that effect, one of the easiest ways of starting on that process is by making sure all of your ingredients are from Sweden. So all of our barley, yeast and water are Swedish, and even for our peated whiskey, we'll talk a bit more detail when we get there, but our peated whiskies, we malt and peat our own barley for it, because when they started in 99, nobody was doing that in Sweden. So they decided that they would do it themselves, just to make sure that everything was Swedish. The other two are innovation and sustainability, which I think go sort of somewhat hand in hand with being Swedish as well, if you ask me.
It's a country pastime, isn't it? They like that in Sweden. That's their nature, I think.
Yes,
They're explorers by nature, and one of the very early adopters of a lot of the environmental sort of policies that are now de facto across all of Europe. So they're always leading in that field, and our distillery is no exception. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we'll tell you all about some of our green credentials and things as we go. And then on the innovation side, we use all sorts of different casks. Not just trying to do, we know ex-bourbon will work, we know sherry will work. 20 years ago when they started, they wanted to use all sorts of different casks that had Swedish influence to them. So Cloudberry wine, lingonberry and blueberry wine, yacht wine, hunting wine, things like that. So yeah, so lots of innovation and Swedishness. And we'll get to sustainability as well. We've been in 3 locations since we began 23 years ago. The first 3 years were in a small pilot distillery with things moving from one garden to the next for malting and peating. When neighbours complained, they had to move on. And we moved into the Brooks distillery that whiskey number 2 tonight takes its name from, where we distilled from 2002 until 2011, 2012, when we moved.
And that town is the name where we got our distillery from, because the Brooks is in the town of MACKMYRA.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. A little township village on a river island. It's not just us trying to sound Scottish. It is an actual place where one of the founders was from. And we'll tell you a little bit about what that means actually as well, what it translates into in very old Swedish as we go through. And we've been since 2011, 2012 in the Gravity Distillery, which Gareth will tell us all about in a moment. We've got warehouses all over Sweden. The one that we're best known for amongst people who have heard and tried our stuff already is the Budas mines. So we keep 99 or 98% of our stock 50 meters underground, under a mountain about 40 minutes away from the distillery. So an old disused iron ore mine that we've converted into a series of warehouse chambers. And then we've got a mountain top warehouse where we keep some small 30-litre casks for private owners, where you can go up to the top, go to a little cafe, warehouse underneath, 3,000 feet in the air, and then ski back down so long as you are safe to do so. And then another, the most interesting I've always thought was on an island called Fjordeholmarna, in the Stockholm archipelago. It's an old disused, again, torpedo store, munition store for the Swedish Navy on this tiny island just outside of Stockholm that's been converted. Here we go. We see in the foreground on the left, and then the bit of this island that's closest to us. So there's a big, huge sort of rock-shaped thing there. That's been hollowed out and used as a munitions store over the past few, century or two, by the Navy. Yeah, so we've got warehouses dotted all around, and then there's another few that we can talk about too. 3 key.
What does it taste like, Richard? What does it taste like?
Well, we've got this. Let's get to the first dram. So last bit is we've got 3 key ranges. The core range, which we're trying everything from tonight. The seasonal range, which come out twice a year, spring, summer, autumn, winter. We're trying last year's autumn, winter release. And until I think 3 or 4 weeks from now, this is our most recent release as well in seasonals. And then the moment range that you can see on the shelf behind Gareth there, which are our very small batch, anywhere from 1,000 to 4,000 bottles made, very highly selected casks. And it's very tasty stuff, but hopefully everyone gets to try one of those one day. That's probably it for a whistle stop tour, Gareth. So I'll say
let's start with the serious business of drinking some whiskey. But just before we start that, guys, when you're drinking, especially if you're kind of new to this, approach it responsibly. The 5 CLs we've got is a big double measure. Maybe just pour about half of it in your glass, and feel free to experiment and work with water. Either I always have a cup on the side, I might have a drink. I don't put a lot of water into my whiskey. I kind of like the ABVs generally that they put out at, but if you want to water it down slightly, for if it's too intense on the alcohol and your flavor in your mouth, do so. There's no rules or regulations. Just drink it the way you'd like to enjoy it. So just make sure that we all enjoy it. So without further ado, let's get into the very first drink from the core of the range. Now, this is our there we go, Mac, the Big Mac, I would call it. There's the version on there on the screen. This is This is a great whiskey, and a well-loved whiskey. It's so aromatic. We don't want to call it entry level because it isn't entry level, but it is, I think, probably the least expensive thing that we do. But it doesn't come in a bottle. It's got a box. It's got a speed. It's got a speed handle on it for bars, and that's really the key of this whiskey. It's a very versatile whiskey, great to sip and drink, but it is also a fantastic flavor base for whiskey for the basis of cocktails as well. So it really has got a high versatile whiskey, and it can cover a lot of bases at the time. It's got a pretty deep color. I don't know if you can see probably the back of that. We do like to we got fairly aged stock in this, so it's getting quite a nice dark color on the back of that. I think there's a particular store in the Bodas mine where we keep all the mac, isn't it? There's a storeroom number 7 or something like that where all the mac is maturing, I think, in getting older.
I couldn't tell you the number, the chamber number, but I know that the big chambers down there are somewhat separated into ex-bourbon here, spice here, as in, sort of Swedish oak casks and Oloroso casks and things.
I'm not as experienced as you because you've been to the distillery, but I haven't. But I'm going out. I've got my tickets booked and going for the distillery to go and check up on one of the casks that I'm a part owner of. So very excited about finally seeing the motherland, if you like, and see some of those. So Mac, 40% ABV, so that's the lowest ABV that we do, and it's kind of there for a reason, because it's to really let out the flavors and let out the subtler notes and sort of compounds that we have within this whiskey. So let's get some in our glass. I have one I prepared earlier. I'm sure you will have as well. And get a load of that nose. You don't have to be very far away from it, and it wafts up really like a spiral right up. You don't have to be very close to it. Lovely, fresh sort of pears and peaches, and yeah, I get a bit more peachy than I used to get pear now, actually, drink this. Maybe I'm just getting older, Richard, but the nose on this always gives that soft pear and apple, green apple as well.
We do hear quite often people say, so orchard fruits is something that you a lot of people find sort of throughout the range. And then stone fruits we do hear about, so like
stone
peach
fruits, almost a hint of cherry as well with the stone, but really good nose. And guys, generally, I mean, we drink whiskey all the time, but you go through your own process and enjoy it the way you do it. But I like to have a look at it, see its viscosity, the thickness, the lines on the glass. Is it nice and clingy? Have a look, get a smell of it, get your nose into it, but then put it on the tongue and let it last. Don't swill it back. Get it in there and get the flavors flowing around. So let's have a swill.
Skull.
Skull. Oh, lovely. Soft, gentle, fruity, well balanced. Nothing offensive about that. It's a really delightful whiskey, really a good base for our flavors, and showcases our core flavors that come off the still. And we have some very fruity flavors that come straight off the still in raw spirit and then enhanced by. This is just oak maturation, simple bourbon casks, and that's all that is involved in this one.
This is I enjoyed it. And you know you were trying to dance around using the term entry level earlier, and I think you said the most inexpensive of our range. I think is a very good way of describing it. But whatever you call it, least expensive in our range or entry level, I think for whatever that descriptor is, this is good. This is good. I think for its price point in the sort of mid high 30s, that's good juice.
Very versatile, either for the sipper like we are generally, or the cocktail guys who like a good whiskey cocktail. So I think this was the first whiskey that was actually produced at our new distillery, the Gravity Distillery, and it's a good point to come on, maybe talk to you a little bit about that. Richard talked about our old distillery, which is in the town of MACKMYRA, the Brooks Distillery. The Gravity Distillery was a whole different concept that we wanted to create something that was splendid, but also very environmentally friendly as well. So it sits in the forest. And it rises up out of the forest, and the big thing about it is it's vertical. Everything is in separate floors that moves down by gravity. It's called the Gravity Distillery. Saves us a fortune on electricity and pumping, etc. But that's just one of the areas in which we try to be economic with fuel and the cost of doing all that. It's got a nice roof bar sitting on the top. It's like 35 meters tall. Do we have a picture of this? We can share. There we go. Thanks very much. So the heat's captured inside and recycled. You can see the stills there out by the big windows, and it all comes off. The draft comes up the bottom, and we recycle that into bio pellets. And I think it's the only one of its kind in production using those bio pellets at the moment. But in its first year, it was alleged to have saved, and there it is, 45% energy costs were saved compared to a traditional distillery built on a more horizontal level. I think probably the best part of that is the top floor, where you get a nice sky bar and you can have a view over there. But we're very proud of that distillery. It has a really good capacity and produces some fantastic spirit off the still. But remember, a lot of the stuff that we're drinking even tonight is being made at the previous distillery. Some of our older stocks and older barrels, they were all done at the Brooks distillery. So did it come online about 2014 or 12? 2012. That's when it came on. So we're getting up to maybe 8-9 years old for there. But the previous distillery has some older expressions which are still being circulated around. So it's great. I'm looking forward to going there as well in the top bar and tasting some of the classic ones. So that's all I've got to say about the distillery. The Mac is beautiful, as it always is. Hope you enjoyed that one. Give us your feedback, any comments, obviously, to go through. And time to move on to number 2 and hand you over to my colleague.
Well, that's it. Yeah, I think, and as we move into Brooks Whiskey, just to repeat what Gareth said there, anyone that has any thoughts, tasting notes, whatever they might be, there's no wrong answers, as I hope everybody knows. If you can find something or you could describe it, it means it is there, and you are right. That's basically that is the bottom of it. But yeah, anyone got any questions about MACKMYRA or the whiskies as we go, please pop them in the chat. If anyone's at home and has a birthday, I don't know, if you've got, let us know and we'll give you a little birthday shout out or something as well. So great. I'm just going to finish off this bit of the.
I did notice somebody online, Martin, was at a MACKMYRA tasting just last night and picked up the AIO2, which is the AI is a really interesting story, the artificial intelligence. We've just recently released the second version of a set of whiskies, which the recipes have been helped developed with artificial intelligence, and there's a big separate story there. But it's a great story to delve into if we had more than an hour, but we don't.
Yeah, I'd say have a look online if anyone's curious about or that's piqued anyone's interest. And Martin, I'm very happy to hear that you're here 2 nights in a row. Is it that on the MACKMYRA game? That's fantastic stuff. Good going. So yeah, Brooks Whiskey. We're moving on to whiskey number 2. Have the blue label in your pack. Brooks Whiskey takes its name from, as we've mentioned a little bit already, from the Brooks Distillery, and you can see on the packaging, on the carton we've got here on the left, you can see a stencil of the white building here in the foreground. It was an ironmonger's and all sorts of different industrial things over the last century or two, and it's been it was our distillery from 2002 until 2011, 2012. It was mothballed when we opened the Gravity Distillery that we're just hearing about. We mothballed it. All the stills and the equipment was kept in there and just maintained and sort of looked after for a few years. And then in 2017, it opened back up and it's become our laboratory lab distillery, where we make gins at the moment, and may well be making other things in the future. Who knows? So we'll focus on the whiskey for a bit and then see what that distillery might do for us. We moved in there in 2002. It was our first proper distillery, if you will. We had two stills, copper pot stills put in that we got from Forsyths. Anyone here that's sort of been into whiskey for a little while or been up to Scotland Speyside and learned about stills will probably have heard of Forsyths. They are I think the foremost copper pot still producers in the world, particularly when it comes to whiskey, but they do all sorts of other things as well. So we got 2 really good bits of equipment put in there. And the casks that we use for this, so the cask recipe, about 90% of this is 200-litre ex-bourbon casks. We got our ex-bourbon casks from a mixture of Four Roses, Heaven Hill, and Jack Daniels. So 3 quite big, I think, well-regarded producers of bourbon that you can get in American whiskey. We've got a small amount of Oloroso sherry casks, a smaller amount of Swedish oak casks, and we'll talk to you about the influence of Swedish oak when we get to Spence, the next dram that we have, and a little pepper and spice and things you get from there as a little spoiler for you, and then a small number of 200-litre ex-bourbon casks again, but ones that have had our smoke tail recipe spirit go into it. So at MACKMYRA, we make unpeated and peated whiskey. The unpeated barley we call elegant, and the peated we call smoky, obvious thing. But we also have something that sits in the middle that we call smoke tail recipe. And that's when we finished making a few months or a few weeks or worth of peated whiskey. Instead of getting inside of those stills and scrubbing them clean and getting rid of all of the smoke notes that are left on the copper, we leave it, and then we just run unpeated spirit through all of that equipment, where it will pick up, and the smoke is left throughout the whole thing. Because smoke, obviously, the peat smoke gets into that barley before it begins. So we run through elegant barley afterwards, elegant spirit, picks up just little hints of smoke, and that means that at the other end we mark them with a cross to say this is a smoke tail spirit cask, and we know that there's just a very subtle little bit of smoke there. So always curious to know if anyone at home is able to find smoke on here. I've worked here now for 2 years. I had Brooks whiskey probably a year before that. I've never once found smoke in there, but every so often, and as I mentioned a minute ago, there's no wrong answers for things, but every so often somebody says, oh, there's a bit of smoke to this, before I've explained what I've just explained. So I might have put things in people's heads already, but
yes,
if you can find smoke in there, it's because of the smoke tail spirit that we've got through, which I think is just quite an interesting, way of approaching making whiskey, because you've got that third dimension all of a sudden, where you can add a little bit of texture, a little hint of smoke, just from having a residual amount of peat go through. 41.4% ABV, so a little higher than the Mac. Everything else we do is pretty much 46%, 46.1%, but this is 41.4. And for me, let me have a little nose of it. It's
I love the bottle on this as well, Richard. The bottle's got like the whole history of the distillery printed all around it. It's got our distillery logo on the top. It's got the famous dimples at the bottom, 8 dimples around the bottom, which are said to represent the thumbs of our founders. So these are all lovely design elements that have gone into this. Our longest standing recipe and our oldest recipe that we do. And it is a big favourite. I like you, Richard. I've never got a blast of smoke when I'm drinking this. More like a bunch of bananas, actually.
Yeah,
it's my nose that I get from this one.
Yeah, definitely. So I don't know whether or not across the English Channel people get hold of foam banana penny sweets. So little tiny sweets, bits of candy, whatever you might refer to it as, but like the squidgy bananas, the foam bananas. That's what I get on the nose on this all the time. But I get some gentle spices, some sort of gentle baking spices to it, and we refer to this sometimes as our breakfast whiskey. You should obviously not start the day with it, or have it instead of milk in your cornflakes. But we call it our breakfast whiskey just because it's got a very light and approachable profile to it. And something that you could, if you had a reason to celebrate that day, or you're off to the races, or somebody's wedding and you fancied having a little dram in the morning, this is something you could have and actually be functioning a few hours later. Everything in moderation and being responsible, of course.
And as the elegant sweet note that you get off the Mac, this one's just got a little bit more ABV and a little bit more complexity, because it's mixing some of those flavors together, mixing a little bit of sherry in there, and so you can tell the evolution from that lovely, just pure fruit flavors to now we're trying to enhance it with the recipe. And that's the whole ethos of the MACKMYRA approach, is recipe based, to find really good recipes that add to the whiskies together. So 1 + 1 = 3, bringing things together, trying to get a balance across what you're drinking, and a repeatable experience.
Oh, well, I'll go to the Palex and not had a sip yet.
You're slacking, holding behind a little bit. That's all right. That's all right. Now, Brooks whiskey is it's a very versatile whiskey as well. Great to have on the shelf, and just it's so fruity and floral as well. You know, it's I think it's our bestseller, isn't it? Anyway, in terms
I think Mac is our best seller by volume.
okay.
Yeah, but Brooks whiskey is not far off of being there. It's been a very popular thing for us. It was our first ever, so I think it launched in 2010 or 2011. It was our first core range whiskey. There was a whiskey that came out before that was sort of the first core range, because everything up until 2008 had all been done in very small batches. There wasn't going to be anything. Everything was a one-off, pretty much. Nothing was going to be repeated, at least not under the same name and that sort of thing. And then 2010, Brooks whiskey was launched, and the one that came out in 2008, went a few more years. But then, Brooks whiskey is our, without going round and round in circles, let me just say it's our first proper core range release, and has now got a big brother that's been released, which Gareth has shown us the bottle of, the vintage 2008. So every cask in the big brother to Brooks whiskey is called the Brooks whiskey 2008 vintage, and every cask in there from 2008.
You got a little diamond on the bottom there which says 2008. I think you can just see it.
Yeah. So yes, anyone at home, please do. Don't be shy. It's usually around dram 3 where people start becoming a bit more chatty, and
we'll start talking.
Which is the same for in person or virtual. But anyone that does have any thoughts, really curious, really interested to hear what people do think. We've mentioned it being fruity and a little gentle spice to it. And quite approachable. If anybody agrees or disagrees, let us know, and or try and make this as interactive as anybody wants, basically. But very keen to hear what.
And it's still got really good legs, for a low ABV. It still sort of clings, and it's quite almost oily finish in the mouth. It's quite like a silky oil finish. It's not thin. It's like you can feel the complexity in the way they've combined these things together.
There's definitely more texture to it, and I think that. It's got. I think if anyone wasn't aware, sometimes when you put when people decide to peat their whiskey, let's say their barley to 6 ppm, 5 ppm, quite often that is because they want to add texture to their whiskey, more so than a smoky element, and be known as a smoky whiskey. So when we use peat or smoked tail spirit, that's us trying to add a little bit of texture to it at the same time, because it does two things, which is, I think, quite an interesting thing. I think this one's definitely got some good texture to it. I think Mac, given that it's been American oak casks, has got a good bit of texture to it, but I think this is a bit more buttery to me.
It feels more intense, slightly more oily, as you say, melted butter. It coats the mouth a little bit more fully, and has that longer lasting finish because of it. The Mac is beautiful when it goes through, but it kind of goes through in a kind of rush. But this one hangs around a little bit more. It's a little bit oily, a little bit more complex. So Swedishness, we talked about Swedishness.
Stuart, now we'll just give a good evening, Stuart, and thank you for joining us. Can smell the bananas.
Of course.
I think the first time I tried this, I thought, oh, there's something fruity to that. I can't tell what it is. And then I think I came back a second time at a festival where I first found MACKMYRA in 2018 or so. It must have been now.
I've heard people be even more specific than that, Richard. That it's actually, they think it's the banana skin, not the banana. The smell of the skin, which is slightly more subdued than the actual banana itself. So I've heard people say, "Oh, I can smell banana skin on that one," as opposed to banana.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, for me, as I mentioned, it's foam banana penny sweets for me all day long on the nose. Not so much on the palate necessarily, although the banana note is still there.
But it's all in you're all self-assessment. Nobody's right, nobody's wrong. Just some people pick up fruits. It's all your mind being tricked by little smelling chemicals that remind you of other fruits, really. But we enjoy talking about them, don't we? Definitely
do. That might not be a bad time, Gareth, unless if we have any questions or anything pop in. Otherwise, we'll move into Spence Ek.
Yeah, I mean, Richard mentioned earlier about this term Swedishness, and one of the things they aspired to was using Swedish wood, and Spence Ek is Swedish wood, and we mentioned there was a little prototype still that we had, which was a 100-litre still, and it came off with 30-litre worth of usable sort of spirit in the middle cut, if you know about those things. And some of the early barrels that we made, it was a discovery that when you put it into a small barrel, and especially a barrel that might have been coopered out of Swedish wood, the effect on the spirit was astounding, and a great discovery. And it's been with us ever since. We sell a lot of 30-litre casks, and there you are, linking it all up. I have invested in one myself. I'm going to see it in May. It's in its second year of an Oloroso finish, elegant. I'm looking forward to seeing how that's coming along. But they're great. They're 30 litres. You get about 50 odd bottles, and between a few people, it's a great little sort of experiment to do that. But the Swedish oak part of it was explosive, and so what we've developed is a recipe that uses and exploits that Swedish oak. But as you'll see on the bottle, in fact, on the cask here, it says only 10% of that recipe is from the Swedish oak. So there is other things involved in it, but that the effect of that, for me, it's about 80% of the impact of that whiskey is from the Swedish oak. And it's a bit of a surprise package because you pour it and it's, you know, it doesn't give you a huge amount of notes off it, to be honest. It's not as floral, as fragrant as the Mac. You know, you don't get quite as much sort of fruitiness even off what you get off the Brooks whiskey, but you get a little element of it. But it seems quite timid, quite, you know, approachable, and it seems, yeah, that's okay. I'll go for that. But beware. Now this is up to 46.1% now. So this is our classic bottling strength of ABV that we use, and it belies that gentle exterior. Have a little taste and see what you think. I think you might be surprised.
I will say as well, Gareth said it at the beginning, but you've got 50 ml 5cl samples of everything. You don't need to pour the entire thing unless you want to, of course. But you know, but half of it, 2/3 of it, whatever you've got. This is just what I like to do when I'm doing a tasting anyway, with such big measures. And then afterwards, I can come back to it and think, oh, I want to see what I think about this after I've tried this other one. And if you've got 2 or 3 glasses or more at home, you can do them all side by side and things as well.
So, as you can imagine, Sweden is a very cold place in the winter. So oak grows very slowly. And this is why it gives it a very different flavor profile from, say, an American oak or a French Limousin oak, something like this. Less sugars involved, less sweetness, more punch, more spicy and pepperiness. So the Swedish oak, it grows a lot slower than the other ones. So they literally can take hundreds of years to grow an oak tree in Sweden. So we use them carefully. We have a regeneration scheme that we're obviously part of. And but it can take a year from taking an oak tree down, cutting out the staves and drying it, because it's such a slow process. We have to dry it out very slowly or else the oak cracks. So, and then we have our own cooperage to make all the woods together and bring those lovely 30-litre barrels together, which we use in our mines. So Swedish oak, it's part of our Swedishness. And we use it extensively in recipes, not just this recipe, which is focusing on Swedish oak, but a lot of our cask recipes as well. Swedish oak often finds that little bit of spice and intensity is provided by the Spence, the Swedish oak whiskey.
I think people probably find that this is a lot more robust on both the nose and the palate than the previous 2 that we've had. And that's because everything that Gareth has just said about Swedish oak, far higher in tannins than American oak would be, far fewer wood sugars, a lot less sweetness from it. And as Gareth mentioned, that's, you know, you have to use it sparingly, because otherwise it just overtakes everything. And there are a good many whiskies that we have that have got anywhere from 2% to 5% of the cask recipe that gone into making those single malts. Has got Swedish oak, where we just want to add a little bit of body in the background, some little pepper, some little spicy bits as well. Gareth, would you mind if I told everyone a little bit about the history of Swedish oak? And
oh yeah, it's a great story. If we've got time for that, Richard, it's a great one. Yes, go for it.
I would like to do so. Oak has existed in Sweden, in the southern parts of Sweden, for just about as long as it's existed anywhere else in Europe. But there just wasn't enough of it. If you think about, you know, how the geography of Sweden and just where it's positioned on the world, on the globe, we don't think about oak trees when you think of Sweden. At least I don't. You think about pine trees and pine forests and things like this. There just wasn't enough for building ships, basically. So in 1830, a newly crowned Swedish king, or recently crowned Swedish king, said we need to go set about planting as many oak trees as we can over the next 10 years, so that we can, in 3, 4, or 5 generations from now, look to the future and make sure that we've got enough wood to build ships for commerce, trade, for war, for empire maintenance, whatever they need it for, just to make sure that they had enough supply of oak. So they sent 3 sort of scouting parties, emissaries around different parts of Sweden in the south to look for a place to set up a new oak forest. And on the island of Visingsö, which is in a Lake Vättern, which is how I pronounce it, I'm sorry, just to the sort of southwest of Stockholm. Second biggest lake in Sweden. There's a big island on the middle of it. Was famous. There have been Swedish kings and things have been buried there over the year. Lots of poetry written about the island. Lots of folklore around it. But on that island, they found 2 examples of phenomenal oak trees. Very big, robust, good sized, straight, tall, not too many branches coming off. If we know about Scottish oak, Japanese oak, very difficult to find trees to make casks from because they're all so spindly and branches coming off everywhere. So anyway, they felled one of these trees, took it back to the wherever the king was residing at the time, and said, this is where we think we should plant our trees. So anyway, they spent the next 10 years planting, I think, as many as 250,000 or 300,000 oak trees on this island, a huge number of them. Again, a very prudent move to plan for the future. However, it takes American oak on average might be 80 years or so until it's ready to be harvested, give or take a decade, right? But in Europe and then in Sweden, it grows much more slowly. So you're looking at anywhere 150 years, 160 years perhaps until an oak tree is ready to be harvested, we say. So anyway, if anyone knows anything about naval history, they might know that in the early 1860s, so only 30 years after the planting of trees began, ironclad ships began to sail the seas. The French had a proper ironclad where they just took a wooden hull, covered it in sheets of metal and set it off sailing. And then in the American Civil War in 1863, I think the USS Monitor, and then its counterpart on the Confederate side, I can't remember what it's called now, the Richmond maybe or something. But they're proper, just pure metal ships began. So 30 years into what would have been a 150-year journey for these trees to be ready, the technology was basically obsolete. Obviously, people still use wood to build boats, I appreciate, but when you're building stuff for empire building or for trade and things, it was, metal was the way to go. So what that means is on this island, there are now hundreds of thousands of trees that were never felled. And they've had one family for 4 or 5 generations, I think they're in the 5th now, that have been maintaining and looking after this forest, keeping it healthy, making sure that everything's okay. And it means that there's lots of trees there now, so that people like us or some small craft furniture makers in Sweden can go over there and select a few trees. Because we use Swedish oak so sparingly in our recipes, we don't need that many trees to do it. So it is, quite, and as Gareth mentioned, things are replanted. It is a sustainable practice, and we end up with some very good, very high quality wood. And the last thing I'll say, because it's something that I find just very, I don't know, for me, I find impressive, a bit of agricultural engineering, I would describe it, to make these trees grow perfect or as well as we can, to make it into ships, long, straight and tall, no branches coming off, which is just what we need for making casks as well. They planted rows of these oak trees, and then in between they planted birch trees and sap and sycamore and whatever they might be. What we can see on the right here are oak trees, which if you're living in the UK like me, well, you'd never call an oak tree. You'd have no idea, and that's because they were grown like this. They were engineered to grow like this. So, but by having trees in between them, it encouraged the oak trees to grow tall and straight before they started sprouting branches, so that they could reach the light. And it's got nothing to do with whiskey, I appreciate, but I love that little extra bit of info for it, because I think it's just so smart and forward thinking, and how innovative to do that 150 years ago.
And we'll replant the trees, but unfortunately, Richard, you and I will not be around when they mature. So,
No. Well, isn't it a wise man or a noble man will plant the trees under which the shade he'll never sit, or what's the?
That sounds quite prophetic if I knew what it was, but it does sound pretty good. So here we are. We're just over halfway through the show. 3 out of 5. What's your favourite so far? Quick reminder, we've got that 40% deal on tonight. So Stjärnrök 40, Stjärnrök, if you're spelling it like I do, there it is at the bottom of your screen. If you fancy getting that lovely one that we're about to come up to and talk through, once you've had a taste of that, if that captures your imagination, go for that and you'll get nearly half price off the second one. So that's a real bargain for tonight, and just over halfway. But now we need to talk about this next one. And again, I think this one's over to you, Richard, isn't it? The Stjärnrök. Am I pronouncing that one, Stjärnrök, properly?
Yeah, I'll have a go if people aren't sick of hearing me talk after going.
Never, Richard, never.
So right, we are on now. Stjärnrök. So Stjärn, before the R begins, star, and then Rök, R-O-K, or the umlaut, smoke. So yeah, star smoke. This means, and this was last autumn winter's seasonal release. So it came out brand new in September or October, I think it was, Gareth.
Yeah.
So on the seasonals are our core range whiskies, the same as any other brand, are about presenting, some good examples of what the distillery is about, what we're about, some of the flavors that we can have, and just sort of how we might want to be seen, by people. And the seasonal range is a little bit different. So the seasonal range is about showcasing our spirit character, which would be in short, orchard fruits, sort of warm, gentle spices, and a sort of maybe an earthy vegetal undertone, sort of linking that sweetness and the spice together, but showcasing that spirit character in slightly different ways that are in step with the season that they come out. So earlier last year we had a spring summer release called Björksap, which is birch sap wine, which is very it was perfect for spring, spring and a nice summer day. Light, quite a waxy texture to it, so apples and pears and things, and just very much in tune with what you'd want to have with a whiskey when it might be not quite as cold as it was before. Whereas this whiskey was designed very much for colder winter evenings, for being out under the stars, star smoke being the name, and looking up, maybe sitting around a fire and enjoying something that's got a bit of body to it, a bit of something about it, a bit of something warming to it, I think I might say, actually. So yes, a star smoke. So this we've got, it's 46.1% ABV again. Smoke and Oloroso should be the sort of the two predominant influence notes or flavors after the spirit character.
And the seasonal, Richard, is where we started introducing sort of a limited number of bottles. So we only produce so many of these, and I think it's anywhere between maybe 10 to 12 up to maybe 15,000 for the more popular ones.
15,
but they have a life cycle.
Yeah, so there's about 15,000 or so, but they're not. So it's not highly limited in its number, but it is limited edition in that once it's gone, it's gone. And they used to take anywhere from sort of 2 to 3 years to sell out of all the stock as MACKMYRA was building its name and it was building its brand in the countries where we are. But the last, I think 4 of the last 5 have sold out in anywhere from a year instead of 3 before, a year to 4 or 5 months. So it's actually, I think we've the seasonals are what's put us on the map, I would expect, because they sit in that sort of upper entry, low premium sort of price range at about £62 or so. Yeah. So an accessible price for somebody that wants to explore whiskey and drink it, but somebody that only buys a blend from Tesco's, £60 could seem like a bit, but I think it sits in that sort of sweet spot in the middle for me, where it's a good investment. Yeah.
And as I mentioned earlier, the whole ethos of exploration, this is the range where we really flex our muscles in that area. And over the last few years, we've done an immense amount of experimentation is probably not the right word, but we've stretched out into combining whiskey with flavors that people would never have thought possible. Green tea was one particular outstanding seasonal that we did, but we've mixed it with and there's two approaches. We can take a barrel that's had something else in it, like rum or Calvados or port, and we can put our whiskey into that. Or we can take barrels and then we can actually put Swedish ingredients inside them, like high-end Swedish wines. As Richard said earlier, a lot of famous Swedish wines that we use to sort of flavor our barrels, and then put the whiskey inside that to take that flavor essence on inside. So lingonberry, loganberry, birch sap, Kirsch wines, deep cherry wines. These are all favorites of Swedes, and we produce some stunning ranges. So we've had a really big catalogue of seasonals, and really it's where we flex our muscles. And every year we bring out one or two seasonals which will contain something interesting.
So one of those, we've got there's some Cloudberry wine casks that have been used with this. So there are some. So and Cloudberry, anyone that doesn't know what a Cloudberry is like, it looks like a sort of orangey yellow raspberry or blackberry, and it's a delicacy in Scandinavian countries, especially. And you may well have tried, some jam you've got from IKEA from it. Who knows? So in this, we've got 57% of the liquid that's gone into this is from our smoky and extra smoky recipe spirit. And then the last 43% is elegant. I think there might actually be 5% of smoketail stuff in there. And then we've got
by the way, extra smoky, I think it's just the smoky recipe as it comes off, but not watered down. Is that right?
Well, it's double. No, it's we use. So when we're making, we're sort of skipping ahead to the Stjärnrök a little bit now. But let's discuss it. When we make our smoky recipe, when we're making peated whiskey, we malt and peat our own barley for it, as I mentioned right at the very beginning. Because we do that ourselves, we haven't got a big, huge operation to do it. And as we scale up as a distillery and make more whiskey, we haven't got the facility to sort of keep up and have huge malting floors. We are a small operation. So what we do instead is we make our peated barley very, very, very peated. So we take the barley up to 60, 65 ppm.
And that's high level stuff, isn't it? That's really
it's not octomore, but it's very high compared to just about anything else, even from Islay. However, when we make a peated run or peated whiskey, all of that barley that we use isn't just that smoky barley. So what I'm saying is we take a proportion of smoky barley, combine it with unsmoked barley, and then we make peated whiskey or peated spirit with that. So about 24% of the barley we use when we're making peated whiskey is smoky barley. And then when we make our extra smoky recipe, we double the amount of smoked barley that goes into it. And so that's what we've got in here. So we've got smoky.
57% is smoky. And I can really understand Stuart's comment when he said, it's like being like a campfire, so warming, imagining sounding like a campfire. And you can almost smell that campfire coming off it, that smoky embers, especially the morning after. So that's a good call out.
It's a better smell than all the reindeer you'd be surrounded with in Lapland as well, I'm sure. Yeah. But a nice, good imagery there, I would say.
Yeah.
Sure.
And smoke and sherry is, in fact, a pretty classic sort of Scottish recipe as well. So a lot of Scottish distilleries have gone down this particular road of mixing a smoky whiskey with a sherry cask, and to good avail. And this is right up with it. It's absolutely gorgeous. The high ABV, the 46.1%, gives it that little bit of kick, real smoke. But the sherry really kicks in well and gives you that mouthfeel, that little tang at the end of the finish that the classic sherry finishes do.
I like to chew on that one. That's got some
literally.
We talked about texture quite a bit, with the other whiskies that we've had tonight. And for me, speaking personally again, because that's what we have to do with whiskey, it's all individual. I'm a big fan of texture. That's one of the most important things for me. So much so that I think I take it for granted with a lot of the whiskies that I try. I don't always think to myself, "Oh, what a good texture." I think that's just that needs to be a minimum standard for me. It's only when I try something that's a bit too watery, I go, "Oh, that's a bit thin. I'm not too fussed." But having said all that, every now and then I'll get something that's got a good bit of bite to it. You chew on it, lingers afterwards. That sort of, and this is definitely that. I can feel it on the inside of my cheeks now and on the back of my tongue, still dancing around.
It hangs around. It hangs around. So we're into the last furlong now, last 10 minutes, and one more to go. And so let's get right into it. Here we are. This is a whiskey dedicated to smoke. So much so we call it Stjärnrok, Swedish smoke. It's that plain and that simple. As Richard mentioned, a really great story about the way that smoking. We decided to produce a smoky whiskey, and the guys who founded the distillery, they went and learned their smoking trade from the guys at Lefroy early in their days, picked up some tips from them and brought it all back and set up their own little smokery in one of their back gardens, experimenting with different styles of approaches. There we have. And there's a little MACKMYRA still, and the smokiness to get them that smoked barley. I think there was a few interesting conversations with neighbours around large clouds of smoke going around, and but they would shovel that in and smoke off that barley and get the outcome from it. But they wanted to use Swedish stuff, so Swedish peat. They found Swedish peat in a place called Karemusenbog, not too far away from the distillery, and but they wanted something else that was typically Swedish, and they looked back and thought, well, in our cooking in our country, we use a lot of juniper twigs in our smoking to get flavor into the food. So they come up with an idea to layer on top of the peat juniper twigs, and the flavor that it gave into it is just beautiful. And the bark of the juniper I think is the key and the magic, because it gives that barky wood smoke flavor to it, as opposed to an acidic peat, which is a classic Islay type of peat coming straight from the peat. The Islay smoke is more acidic. This is literally, I'm next to a campfire, I'm drinking a campfire.
Yeah. The first time I gave this whiskey to a friend of mine, long before starting working here, actually, was my friend Alex, and the first thing he said, we had a little nose of it, he said, this is like a campfire in the rain. So just about every tasting I do, it's a very sort of romantic, poetic sort of tasting note or thought, I think. But a campfire in the rain, because it's got that smoke to it, but then there's like a sort of a wetness, like a dampness that I've not found on in anyone else's peated whiskey with that. And I think it's just a different dimension that for me is incredibly interesting and quite appealing.
And on the box is embossed. I don't know if you can see that, but we embossed the twigs that are on there. That classic, that's the USB, the juniper that we go on there. And it's great because we don't have to go out and cut this down or anything. The electricity company spend all year trimming down the juniper branches around the pylons, the electricity pylons. So we just really have to go up a couple of times a year and gather it all up and lay it out on top. So, I think the difference of the flavor is astounding. And we don't often. We keep it to the end because it's got a very distinctive and quite intense flavor profile. So we normally put it at the end. But some people say we always save the best till last. It's only a 50 cl bottle, by the way. The smoking process is an expensive process. It's manually intensive. We do it all by hand. And so to keep the price point reasonable, we do a 50 cl bottle of this, but 46.1%, so it's up there. I'm going to put it in here. And it has got obviously other bits and pieces in it as well. It's not just smoky recipe, as Richard said. We've got Oloroso hiding inside there as well, and different cask sizes that go towards this recipe. Beautiful color. Last one. Here we go.
Yeah, so cask makeup for this: ex-bourbon, Oloroso, little bit of Swedish oak, and then some American oak, some just virgin American oak casks that have been used, or virgin or first fill that we've used before.
Yes, as Richard mentioned, we malt our own barley on site, and that we still got the original big storage unit where Hakan's the guy who's been there since day one.
Hurken.
Look, I'm not pronouncing it. I know the guy. I can barely spell it. I'll meet him in May when I'm over there and shake that man's hand, and there'll be a lot of smoke on it, I'm sure. There's the guy. He's been in charge of that smoke room ever since year dot, and he's responsible for all of our smokiness coming out. So big handshake to that guy when I meet him, definitely, because he's provided a lot of pleasure over the years, let me tell you. So on the nose, that the smoke is subtle, but it's campfire. It's soft. It's wood. It's a subtle smoke. It's not hard and acerbic. On the mouth. Oh, I think I'm just going to sit by the settee with the rest of this bottle for the night, Richard. This always hits the right spot. I mean, the other whiskies are beautiful, but when I come back to this one at the end, I am a bit of an Islay guy at heart from when I started my whiskey journey 20 odd years ago. But the smoke on this always gives me that lovely warm feeling at an end of a tasting, and it really brought full circle. So, and because it's last, it always kind of gets my favorite tick. So guys out there, what's your favorite tick tonight? We've had 5 clearly different expressions: soft and fruity, a little bit more complex, Swedish oak, the cherry in the smoke, and then the big smoke to finish. A lot of different styles that we offer. And this is the point, really. We offer a different sort of approach to whiskey. We're not just put it in a barrel and leave it X years. We're about combining the flavors and putting out really crafted recipes that are repeatable, reliable. And, you know, some of the shorter term recipes obviously are limited editions, but it's all about crafting the whole journey of that whiskey, from its vision to its smell, through the mouth, and on the finish at the back, you know. This doesn't happen by accident. We've got a really skilled team of people that put these recipes together, and long may they continue. So what's your favorite one? What's yours tonight, Richard?
Well, yeah. Spence Geck, I think, is something that's the one I probably go to the most when, you know, I fancy I want to take a dram of an evening and have a look about. But Stjärnrök for me, I like to have it at the end to close on, because I think it's my secret favorite. I changed my mind. You could ask me a different day, I'll give you a different answer depending on the mood that I'm in, or, you know, the company that I'm keeping that day. But Stjärnrök for me. I'm always curious to know as well if there are anyone, so, you know, Martin, Stuart, or anyone else that's with us this evening. Do people like peated whiskey before, or maybe not? And then what do they think of this? Because every so often, well, actually, I say every so often, I can be sort of more clear than that. Just about every tasting we do, there might be one person that says, "Oh, I didn't like peated whiskey before, but this is." They'll say either this is all right, or this is good, or, oh, actually, I might be converted. Somewhere on that scale, we'll find somebody, and that's because this, as Gareth was talking about, you know, the differences between sort of peat and smoke in this compared to other whiskies that people might be more familiar with. This is very different type of smoke, and it doesn't have that medicinal iodine TCP sort of note that can be something that puts people off of the, you know, the Cadalton 3, the Southeastern Isla distilleries, those 3 in the bottom right corner, you know, have they're obviously individual, you know, flavors and things to them, but
and a required taste. But you either they're a Marmite of whiskies, you love them or you hate them. Yeah.
They definitely have that, because I think they all use Ida peat, those guys down there, whereas some of the other Ida distilleries use Highland peat. That medicinal thing's not quite there. But yeah, medicinal stuff can put people off. And yeah, always curious just to know. I think Stuart's commented, thank you, Stuart, just saying Stjärnrök, so good. So it sounds like Stjärnrök might be Stuart's favourite.
Maybe a smoky recipe as opposed to more pure play smoke coming out the back of here.
Stjärnrök for me, out of all the seasonal whiskies that have come out, at least during our tenure here, Gareth, because we started at the very same time, Stjärnrök for me has been probably one of my favourites to drink. I think Grant Tea, the green tea one that came out just as we started here, that was the most exciting one for me, and very, very, very drinkable. But exciting because it was just bizarre. You know, it's crazy. It was an out there thing. But this for me is something I would come back to time and time again to drink and introduce to friends and things as well. Yeah.
So there are just 5 examples, 4 from our core range and 1 from our extensive seasonal range. So on offer. So a reminder, if you like that Stjärnrök, and there are people that saying it's really good, buy it and you get 40% off. That's I think it runs until Sunday. Yeah, expires at the end of play Sunday on the 27th of February.
40% off of the core range. Yeah, so the
core range. So there we go. Use the code Stjarnrok40. You can see it on the bottom there. Slowly, I won't spell it phonetically, but you get the idea. And order them up. And if the Stjärnrök's in your top 2, be a good deal to get that one in a second one. From so.
Sorry, Gav.
Wrap up, I guess, Richard. You got a few closing comments?
Yeah, just to jump in. Sorry, just because we're talking about the offer there. If I could ask Carl in the background, please. If you pop that code into the chat, just so that people have got it there if they want to come back to it in a bit or something. Just because, I don't want to make a big deal out of the spelling for it, but just in case. But it's not like, you know, MACKMYRA 40 where people will remember it quite easily. But if you could, Carl, that'd be really helpful. And I'll say, closing things off, we're people might be able to find us.
Yeah, we're out and about again. I mean, notwithstanding today all the regulations stopped for the legal regulations, but we're out at shows again, out doing tastings. I'm out in Leicester this weekend, if anybody's in there, 23 Wine and Whiskey, doing a tasting in their shop. And I think the following weekend, we're working together in a whiskey show in Birmingham, Richard, aren't we, all day? So looking forward to meeting people and talking about whiskey. It's what we love to do.
At Whiskey Birmingham. So if everyone has a little search for Whiskey Birmingham, there may well still be tickets left. I'm not sure. Have a look. But if anyone is based around the Midlands of England, please come and have a look. And there will be a really, really, really good festival that's happening. We are one of many, I'll say good brands that are there from what I've seen on there. And the people.
And it's going to be great to be out on the road again and talking whiskey and meeting people. This has its place. It's great. We've got a great reach for people, but there's nothing quite like sharing a whiskey in person with somebody. So looking forward to doing that.
That's the perfect thing to close on, I think, Gareth, because what a wonderful and lovely sentiment that is. I'll say thank you to everyone that's joined us this evening.
Thanks to Carl.
Thank you for your interaction, and everyone else that's just come along and sat for the ride. Very happy that you've come to do so. So Gareth, fantastic to do another tasting with you, and I look forward to on the 5th. Good luck for Leicester. Carl in the background, great job as always. And I'll say good evening and good night to everyone, and hope to see you again sometime soon. And good health.
Cheers, guys. Scarl.